Willis, thank you so much for being here tonight. We appreciate you applying for a position of superintendent, and it's a compliment to us, our school system, our city, to have you here. You're one of top of 5 finalists, and we've been doing interviews last night, tonight, and then we'll finish up tomorrow night. So we're going to start, just introduce ourselves. I'm Kathy Brown, longtime resident of Trussville, been here many years, 36 years, and have 5 children that have been through the system. And actually my dad has 2, graduate of 1950. Add that one up. He's 91. So
it's impressive.
I'm Kim DeShazo. I'm not a Trussville native, but have been here for about 16 years. I've got 3 children who are in the Trussville City school system right now. So we're all in and for Trussville at our house. So,
Right.
But thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it.
So Mark Sims, 8 years in Trussville, moved here for schools, and my youngest graduated here last year and is now spending all my money at Auburn after his Trussville education. So.
My name is Sherry Tolbert. I've been living in Trussville for 17 years, and I had 2 children to graduate from Trussville City Schools. And I love my community, and I love serving my community. And welcome.
She's too humble. He's a professional baseball player too. He's really easy.
Well, you know what? We have to talk about the little one. She's a senior at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide.
Yeah.
Good deal. Steve Ward, I've lived here since 2006. Had 2 grandchildren that went through Trussville City Schools. I'm a retired educator. All of mine was in Georgia. But we moved here to be near our grandchildren. So good to have you with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
well, thank you so much for being here. And we sent you a question bank to pull from, and we'll be using that. But each board member will just kind of round robin and be asking you questions tonight. And we'll leave some time. We expect it to last about an hour, a little over an hour maybe. And we'll leave some time at the end for anything you may want to say, or if you want to ask us a question. So feel free to do that. So let's start off over the next 2 to 3 minutes. If you just want to open it up and just tell us anything you want us to know about your education, your work experience, personal, or anything like that.
I'm Tony Willis. I'm currently the superintendent in Demopolis City Schools, which is just outside of Tuscaloosa. And I have 3 children myself. All 3 are, I think they consider themselves grown, but much like you, my youngest just finished, she's still in college. My other 2 are grown and married. And yes, they spend all my money in college as well. But I've loved the job that I have in Demopolis. Currently overseeing, we have 2 elementary schools, a middle school, and a 5A high school. And previously, I was a district administrator in Decatur City, a principal in Decatur, a principal in Sheffield, and a principal at Mars Hill, and an assistant principal in Limestone County. Spent my life in education. I guess I started at 6 years old and have never stopped going to school. But I love it. It's something that we spend enormous amounts of time on our jobs. All of us do. As a man of faith, if I'm going to spend that much time on something, I want it to be something that I feel good about, that's making an impact for the future. I got my undergraduate at University of North Alabama. My advanced degrees were at the University of Alabama. I'm currently in my last class on my doctorate, and it is in leadership studies at Marshall University. And I'm excited to interview for this, but it's not looking for greener pastures or anything. I love where I am. I love the job, but Trussville is one of the top jobs that, I view it as one that piques interest because of your record, because of your reputation, that I talk to a lot of people, and I think almost every superintendent in the state considered applying for this job. It's one of those that it speaks very highly of you, but you've done a great job. As I mentioned in my cover letter, I feel like that hopefully I can show you that I've had a track record of success, that I feel like if we could bring that here, we could go from being, as your plan 2040 says, being a premier destination for public education. I would want that, just change that one word and be the premier destination.
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments. We think we live in a great city and we have a great school system, and we're just looking to keep moving forward. So As the new superintendent of this school system, what would be your actions in the first month, the first few months, and the first 6 months in your time of office? And how would you gauge your success at the end of that?
It's always important. And I know that sometimes, and you've listened to people already, and you've still got people, and sometimes people love to try to wow people with some massive plan of here's my 42 points of what I'm going to do. And I guess I'm old enough to know I have to be careful about that, because the first thing is schools are not a template that, oh, this worked there, so I have to plug it in here. The first thing I've got to do is listen. I actually plan that out, and it's not something I plan or talk about I would do. This is what I've always done. The very first thing I do is I schedule literally in the first few days at your convenience is one-on-one conversations with each board member individually. Then I want to go to each of my principals, each of my building level administrators, each of my central office staff. It takes a long time, but I literally sit down one-on-one with every one of these people. I ask 3 questions, and that's all I do. I'm not talking. I ask 3 questions, and then I just listen. And it's what I've always done. I ask the same 3 questions. Number 1 is, what do you love about your job? Or in your case, it would be, what do you love about the school system? Second thing I want to know is, what can we do better? And then the third thing that I always look at is, what can I do? What can I do personally as superintendent to support you better? And then I just listen and take notes. I do that in the first few days with all the leadership people, but then I actually branch out. I think it's essential. I've always done this with police chief, fire chief, mayor, city council. As you move into the first month and the second month, you branch into business leaders, the Rotary Club, Lions Club. Talk to these people. Some of those have to be as groups, but as much as possible, the leaders, it's one-on-one. I would have a meet and greet at each campus where teachers can come and we can talk, and any of them that want to meet with me individually, I will. I don't attempt to try to meet with every teacher individually, but any of them that want to, I do. I do, however, in the first 3 months, always circle back and meet with like I would go into Cahaba, Magnolia, and Payne and meet with the entire grade level. The 12 first grade teachers at Payne or the 5 first grade teachers, and just let them talk. And the same 3 questions. And as I write it down, I've always sent an email, because you've always got the person who maybe didn't feel comfortable saying it in front of everyone, and say, here's what I heard. Here's what I heard you to say that you love. Here's what I heard you to say that we need to do better. And is there anything I'm missing? Anything I need to add? That's where I start. As you get further with your timeline, by the time you're getting to late summer, I think it's important to have advisory committees of employees, of students, and then parents and stakeholders, business community people. I think all of those groups are essential. I think that, as the question addressed, like 6 months out, 6 months from the start date would actually coincide about with the end of the first quarter. You're looking at that first checkpoint academically, not just academically, but at that point, you already get your ADM, you get your numbers for funding for the next year. And anytime we can get an advance notice of what it's looking like, are we going to have more money or less money? Those are important. And then attendance, you get a jump start on so many things. So, at the end of the day, it's a lot of listening. You can call it an assessment phase or a listening tour or whatever, but I'm going to listen to people and ask those same 3 questions and try to start compiling, what are the themes I'm hearing from everyone? When you get a consensus that everyone is saying these are the things we need to do better, then that needs to move up my priority list of what we need to work on.
Yep, right there. So once you've kind of come in and you've gotten your bearings and you see those needs and things, how do you then take that and create your own culture of positive culture amongst not only your teachers, but your other stakeholders, your administrators, your students, your parents, your community as a whole?
Great question. I feel like that when you use the word like the culture, to me, that is the top priority. I am convinced that, and it's not just a personal thing, I've seen it work everywhere, is when people are happy, the phrase, if mama's not happy, nobody's happy. Well, a lot of times mama's the teacher in the classroom. And if the teacher loves their job, they're better at it. The fact of the matter, if you think back to your favorite teachers, and throughout your life, you've always said, think back of your favorite teacher. Well, when you picture that person, they were very passionate about what they did. And typically you probably learned more from them as a direct result. So it's not that I focus exclusively on culture and climate at the expense of student achievement, but I think it is a direct predecessor to student achievement. So, the nuts and bolts of it is you've got to listen. You've got to have some common goals. You've got to have these academic goals and culture and climate goals that are our goals. It can't be what Tony Willis came in and said, this is what we're going to do. We were a 95 and we're going to be a 97 on our state report card. No, it's got to be, we talk about it and everybody's bought in and says, okay, this is what we want to be. And let's connect the dots between how to make that happen. I've always looked at 3 words that I think are key to that. Relationships. We're working with people. We're working with a lot of people. We can't take the people piece out of it. And the fact of the matter is relationships is what's going to drive a lot of that. The best example I have of that is I coached for years, and I taught at an elite school where half of our kids were going to Princeton and Harvard and Oxford and Vanderbilt. And so when I have an AP chemistry class, most of these kids end up in medical school. And my point guard was in that class, and he was making A's and flying through. And I thought, yeah, Luke's smart. I thought he was smart. He seemed like it. And when I checked his report cards at the Christmas break, I said, Luke, you've got an A in AP chemistry and you've got C's and everything else. He just kind of laughed. And he said, well, you're my coach. I'm going to do my best for you. And I thought that's so true, though. If you have a relationship, you get more out of people. So I think that's important as a superintendent, having relationships with faculty and staff and leadership, but it's also important for those teachers to have relationships. A second piece is the relevance. We get in a society where we don't have time for things that aren't relevant. We don't have time for busy work. We recognized it when we were 16, when the teacher gave us busy work. Our adults still recognize when the superintendent's having meetings that we're sitting here thinking, couldn't this have been an email? We have too much to do for things to not be relevant. We're not going to do training that we can't directly connect the dots to improved student achievement. We've got to make sure that things are relevant. And the last is rigor. We hear that word a lot in education in terms of working with our children, but I also think it works for our faculty and staff. People take pride in accomplishing something that was a challenge. I've yet to say, I've heard people speak before at workshops or at conferences that put by their name, they climbed Mount Everest. I've yet to hear anyone tagline that they climbed Red Mountain, and there's a significant difference. Tennessee this past year, they beat UT Martin, they beat Kentucky, they beat Vanderbilt, and they beat Alabama. But there's only one of those they rushed the field and tore down the goalposts over. It's because it was a harder challenge. And I think the adults in the building like having a challenge that once it's accomplished, they can feel accomplished, So I feel like those 3 things are always big on that culture and climate. Now, and I think if we get to it later, I'd love to share some examples, but that's kind of the driving overarching pieces for culture.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that a little bit when it comes to parents?
Yes, parents. The piece is when we're working with students, we have to remember that every single student is someone's world. That is their world. That's the reason they even care about Trussville City Schools, is because of that child. It's no coincidence that all 5 of you introduced yourself, and the second thing you said was you told me about your children, who your children were and where they went to school and things like that. We have to remember that. And I always tell our people, we have to treat every child like they were our own. And the other piece is I have a responsibility as superintendent to engage community members, and that's going to be business leaders and municipalities, the police chief and all that. But then I've got to engage parents and families, because realistically, that's the only way to know their needs and concerns. I have to have a relationship so that when I'm at the ball game or when I'm at Publix or when I'm at church, they feel comfortable mentioning something to me. It may not always be on the radar large enough to say, can I schedule something at your office? I want them to know that's perfectly fine. But a lot of times you learn just as much at the T-ball game where you start hearing about what's going on. And sometimes that can be helpful. So I think that engaging parents is good. A wise teacher, it was a counselor one time, she told me, because we were trying to work on parental involvement, engagement in the schools. And she said, everybody wants to be involved with their kids. Just some people have to be asked. She said, sometimes we're just lazy and we just kind of assume that these are the only ones because they volunteer. But by nature, not everyone is the type that will volunteer. And I found that to be true. We'd start reaching out to people and say, hey, would you like to be involved with this? Would you like to help with this? Would you like to serve on this committee? And we don't have to have the same 8 parents on every committee every year. We can diversify that. And I think people embrace that because very few people don't want to be involved in their children's lives.
I almost wanted to stay on Kim's question. You said you had some examples you wanted to
Yes.
share.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to go ahead and get them.
There's so many things. And I know sometimes, and there's some pictures in that you can look at later, but because sometimes they don't sound like that big a deal, but my experience, I've done this at multiple districts, just for culture and climate. The last, including Demopolis, we have bought jerseys for everyone. And when I say a jersey, like all our employees only, a football jersey. So here it'd be like a red jersey or a black jersey, and we put Trustful across the chest, but on the back, it has your name. It says Sims across the back. The number on the jersey is the year you became employed by Trustful. So in Demopolis, we have people with a 15 and we have an 02. We actually have a 77 in Demopolis. This is every CMP worker, every custodian. When we wear those on Fridays, when we wear those to school that day, there's something that just kind of reminds us we're all on the same team. When the principal, the teacher, the custodian, the paraprofessional, everybody has on the same jersey. The only difference is that number and the name on the back. That's been a big piece. We do something fun with it on the first day at Institute. Everybody wears their jersey, and the principals call the new hires to the stage because they don't have a jersey yet. And this past year, it would be like, Miss Brown, number 22, and it's like the NFL draft day. And they get their picture taken with their jersey. And when people retire, we frame it, we let everyone sign it, and we retire their jersey. So that's been a fun thing, that it's amazing, something as simple. With that, we do, big trophies that we have, what we call traveling trophies, that each year we name, the master chef, which cafeteria of our school, of our 4 schools is the best, and which, service with a smile. We have the cleanest campus. We have the highest employee attendance rate, the highest student achievement rate, which grade level or which department, math science, had the most growth. So we have 8 traveling trophies, and we don't do it like upward soccer where everybody gets a trophy. I mean, if one school can hoard all 8 trophies, and I think honestly that's what they're trying to do, is beat each other out. Every time I go to one of our elementaries, the custodian, he's close to retiring. He always says, we've won that every year. And he says, as long as I'm here, we're always going to win the Clean Campus Award. And there's a pride, because then the others are saying, what are they doing that we're not? Because we want to win that. Those are just culture and climate pieces. I know every employee in our district's name. I guess I'm not old school by any means, but a handwritten note. I have in years past, on the first day of school, every single employee has a handwritten note on their desk. Do what?
Every single employee?
Every single employee.
Custodial, lunchroom staff?
Yes, every single employee. I don't differentiate. There's times you have to differentiate, but everybody's making our district better. And I'm indebted to every one of them, because all it takes is a few to not do their job well, and it's a reflection on all of us. So yes, absolutely, every single one. Another piece that we did, and I did this years ago when I was principal, And for some reason it caught on, and every job I've taken, they would announce that I used to do that, and it kind of builds this pressure to do it again. But years ago, when I was principal, I am married to a teacher. She was a third grade teacher at the time. She's teaching second grade in Demopolis now. And she realized how she didn't have her teaching stamina on day one and was exhausted on day one, like no other tired, but you still come home and your kids still expect you to cook supper and take care of things. So I, at that time, just as a principal, reached out. I thought, okay, our churches are pretty proficient at potlucks. How about y'all take care of supper and we'll get it to-go boxes? And everyone just came through and fixed not only their dinner the first day of school, but everybody in your household. And you take it home and dinner is on us. Well, it caught on. Once you do that, it goes on. And then when I got to Decatur, we did that. And so now in Demopolis, that was one of the first things I did. I started reaching out to the local churches, and the very first day of school, every single employee goes through the line and fixes whatever their kids would eat. You know, some of them just want chicken fingers and macaroni and cheese, and they make their husband, their wife, their kids a to-go box. And the first day I thought of as just a nice little token, but every single year I literally have women who, are crying. They have tears rolling down their cheeks saying, this is the best gift I've ever gotten in my life. I think that I don't know if it's the thought, I don't know if they're really that tired on the first day, but those kind of things go a long way. Those are just some examples that I think have made a difference in creating a culture and climate where people enjoy their job. And I think that is a segue into student achievement.
So I'll stay on climate culture just 1 second before I go another question. Define the difference for me, or do you think there is a difference?
I think there is. I think that climate can be more, I think the culture can include a lot of different things like expectations. We have a culture of we're going to do things right. We're going to do things in a way that, it's not just that we want high achieving academics. We want, if the trustful name is on it, if it's a band competition, if it's a theater production, we want it to be top notch. Climate sometimes can be a little bit different, that can deal more with attitude, but I feel like that they're used almost synonymously, but I think there is a difference in the two. But I want it to be something that both long-term people enjoy their job, people feel good about their job, not just an attitude, but an expectation.
You mentioned something interesting about everyone you talked to probably wanted to apply for this job. There were quite a few. I don't know how it equates to others. You're one of 5. Why? What do you think it was in you that got you here for the 1 of 5?
It's a little challenging sometimes, maybe against my nature, but I have to remind myself, this is a job interview. That's what you do.
He's not always good. So.
At the end of the day, I have been very blessed, and it is always a team effort. We would not be able to overcome bad faculties, but my first position, I moved into a district. I was assistant principal, and in the 1 year, we went from the lowest scores in the district to the highest. So the next year, a school offered me 1 year as an assistant principal. The next year, they offered me a job as a principal. We went from one of the lower performing schools in the state. The second year, we jumped 17 points on our state report card, and we became the second highest growth in the state of Alabama on reading. So then Decatur called and said, can you do that here? Because there was a challenge that no one had figured out, and that was the EL students. And I said, we'll see. And he said, if you can do that, you're going to be at district level and you'll be a superintendent before long. And that wasn't really, I've never really thought it. I do my job and I do it well, and whatever happens, happens. I came over there, and our EL students in the first year went from 21% proficient to 72% proficient, a 242% increase. The ELA scores increased 46%. We grew 13 points on the state report card. Moves me to the district level. We have the record high on AP scores. We moved up on our ACT scores. So Demopolis offers me a job as superintendent. In our very first year, we jumped 5 points as a district on our state report card. And that was the 5th highest in the state. And it was 4 points higher than the district has ever scored on their state report card. We actually had an increase in our math scores that were so high that a professor from, it was Harvard and Stanford, East Coast, West Coast combined. This was to go to the legislation to basically convince them they need to continue federal funding for schools because everyone's going backwards. And when they released the National Education Recovery Scorecard with 37 school districts across the nation, and it's a scatter plot, and there's a picture of it in your book, but there was some dots up towards the top. We were the 10th highest growth in the nation on math, and we were the top 2% in the nation on ELA. And breaking it out, our minority scores were actually #1 in the nation. And my 2 previous stops, our minority scores have been top 10 in the state. And I thought that was going to be one of the things I hang my hat on. But now we're #1 in the nation for our minority math scores, and we're #4 in the nation on our ELA, the growth. So I think there's a proven track record that every time I've moved into a district, we've immediately jumped to all-time highs.
This year,
Our graduation rate was higher than it has been in a long time.
21 to 22,
I'm sorry, did what?
your
No, it went up.
graduation,
We went up.
we were up a little bit, okay.
We did.
I saw in today's papers, the reason I was asking, I
Yes.
forgot what it was.
We went up, and it was not just a dramatic amount, but I think coming out of COVID, if anybody's going up, it's positive. As a matter of fact, at our high school, and of course, you have to understand the report card for high school is a year in arrears. So some of the data that we got last year won't be showing up on the report card till next year. But we actually improved. We had the all-time high for CCR rate at our high school. Our graduation rate went up. Our ACT scores went up. Our work keys percentage went up. Our dual enrollment was the highest it's ever been, and our AP scores were the highest they've ever been. Every single metric.
Run on that real quick. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So my follow-up question
Yes.
is, can you give us some examples of how did you get those scores to go from this point to
Yes.
this point, this point? What programs or how did you get the teachers to buy into your?
Yeah, well, and Ms. Tolbert's all over the way I wanted to ask that. Because your leadership style, how did you impact that and that buy-in? So let's
Yes.
read that in your leadership and what impact you had on that, what significant things you caused that. So
I've-
Oh, yes, sir.
that's where I was going.
And there's a lot of different terminology for different leadership styles. If I were to describe it, it probably fits more as transformational or democratic, depending on the situation. There's some situations. I'm not one, when you do these personality tests, I'm the one who really doesn't care if it's my idea. I just want to find the best idea, the way to get it done, regardless of whose idea it is. I will give you some specifics, but I will say that I think it starts with that culture and climate. You get everybody understanding the buy-in that this is what we're trying to do. You get people loving their job. And I remember Kobe Bryant once said that even the laziest person in the world will swim across the ocean if it's for someone they love. And his point was, he said, love will make it where you never work a day in your life if you do something you love. And Steve Jobs even said, great work always is rooted in loving what you do. So I've yet to meet a teacher that when I interview them and ask them why they went into education says, well, for the money. You know, they never have. And it's always really one of two things. I wanted to make a difference, or it was a calling. That's what they all say. And when you look at that, sometimes they have to be reminded of, okay, let's think back to your why. I talk a lot to individual teachers about the fact that we spend more than half of our waking hours at work. Every one of us do. And in a way, you start thinking, man, that's messed up. You know, there should be more to life. Well, then it's that much more important to love what you do. So we have to create an environment where not only do you love it, but you can feel accomplished at the end of it all. I don't want to look back and think, man, I was just counting the days, punching the clock till I could retire. No, it needs to be something that you feel good about. Getting people to remember their why. So that kind of sounds ambiguous, The nuts and bolts are a lot of things like, number one, high expectations. You have to have high expectations. You also have to make sure you're teaching the standards and in the right proportion. Everybody talks about teaching the standards, but some of them actually are power standards. They're more essential. You can track on a graph which math standards lead. These are fundamental math standards that lead to 15 other things you'll do in trigonometry and calculus. And then there's other things that kind of dead end. It's a neat thing to know, but it's not essential for further development in math. To go back to a sports analogy, we practiced free throws every day. We didn't practice half-court shots. Well, we would take a half-court shot sometimes at the end of a quarter, but because it's so far and few between, we didn't spend time practicing it. We practice the things. We also do it in a way that if you're going to train for a marathon, you don't run a 5K. But sometimes we're putting kids into a test, a state assessment test, like the ACT that's 3 hours long, and they have not taken a test all year that lasted over 20 minutes. And we wonder why they kind of phase out on the second half, or why their stamina is not there. Well, because we haven't trained them. It's like we're putting them out on a marathon and all we've ever done is run a mile. Our elementary kids, to take it out of an ACT context, typically what they do in class is read a paragraph and then they analyze it and they look for comprehension. But on their ACAP, it'll be 4 paragraphs and then it will be 4 different reading passages. We have to build that stamina, not for the sake of performing on a test, but that's a life skill. And in reality, sometimes being able to perform in that moment is a life skill. I mean, you wouldn't have your job if you had not passed the bar. And it doesn't matter what your expertise. It's like there's some things in life that you're not getting in medical school if you don't pass the MCAT. So there is a life skill that is related to, but okay, I get that you're doing well. I get that the gymnast can land it all day and in practice, but you have to do it when it counts. So that's the testing piece. We talk a lot about standards. We make sure our teachers understand the proportion. We make sure that we teach bell to bell. There's an urgency, that we're strategic. Too many school systems make their pacing guide of, okay, we have to cover all this material and the pacing guide goes till the end of May, but the state testing's at the beginning of April. So you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to have 5 weeks of standards that we don't get to when we take our state test. So you have to adjust your pacing guide and finish it by the time we test. A lot of those things are the fine-tuned details that make a difference. I still think, though, that the teacher that you loved, that was passionate about their work, you could feel it, and you studied harder, and you like Luke Copeland, hey, I did good because you're my coach. If you have a relationship.
They got mine. Did that get yours?
Okay, yes, they got mine. Just have another question. So being the superintendent, you're going to be handling the operation budget, right?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
explain to me how you going to be dealing with different programs for special education, federal programs, career tech, risk programs, and even athletics. Sometimes people forget about athletics. How are we going to deal with our operation
Yes.
budget?
Great question. It's interesting. I have 2 distinct experiences that help with that. I mean, well, and this one doesn't count. I've been an athletic director and I've coached, so that one's going to be hard for me to forget about. Usually the community doesn't let you forget about that one. But then there's also the side of currently in Demopolis, it's similar in size to this in that our central office, we've got 9 people in there and you've got 4 schools. So we all have to wear multiple hats. A lot of times your federal programs also does something else, or your curriculum is secondary and elementary. I understand that. But also in Decatur, it was so specialized where you literally have an expert just on a niche piece of it all. And I tried to learn a lot from those experts and gather information from them. As far as the funding piece, it's fascinating. I had something due yesterday. The AASB has asked me it would be a week from yesterday that I am actually training. I've got a 2-hour training where I'm teaching our new superintendents in the state about this exact question. The funding, the foundation program, how do you operate all of this? So I don't know if I'm that good at it, but apparently AESB, they're asking me to do it, and it may just be no one else would say yes. But that's something that it also requires you to dig in and understand those things. I think that it is important to understand how they all work together, and how we have to keep our focus on being responsible with our money and making sure that we connect the dots from where we're spending our time and where we're spending our money to what our desired destination is. And as long as we keep that, then I feel like that it helps to streamline it. But I do take a lot of pride in knowing it's very hard to lead a district if you do not know about one of the departments. You have to understand. I'm one of the few superintendents. I will go to the special ed case, law conference, and I will go to the IT piece just because I feel like I have to know some of this. I also use a lot of data. The fact of the matter is a lot of these operations can be quantified if we're diligent and if you'll do the research. Like I know that the devices per IT person in your district, the Southeast regional average is 1,000 devices per person. So when I realized ours were 1,500, it wasn't that I went to the board and said, we need to hire, at least another part-time IT person because this one's a squeaky wheel or they complain. It's based on they actually have a much harder workload. I know that 40,000 square feet for each custodian. I know what the C&P meals per work hour is. And that's actually how we look at it. That's how we give our master chef trophy is who is getting the most meals produced per work hour. And when you start quantifying things like that, and we track, the number of medications that each nurse gives out, which type of, different things that our mental health coordinators are seeing and our mental health nurses, when you start putting everything in a spreadsheet and you look at state averages and industry averages, then it's not as much about, well, this person just likes to complain and this one will just suck it up and tough it out. It's like, no, you're having to carry a much bigger workload. We know how many acres our grounds people can do on average, and we can say, okay, you're complaining, but you have less than the industry average. So let's get it done. Thank you. Sure.
Talk about communication. What are your thoughts on how you're going to communicate with everyone, stakeholders, teachers, board members? What process are you going to use? What technology are you going to use? How are you going to go about this? Tell us everything you know. Just tell us what you know about communication.
Well, obviously it's important. And I always feel like the responsibility is on us to do that. Sometimes in education, we get kind of this incestual thing that we think we can only learn from other education groups, and we talk to each other on how they do things. And there's a lot of, there's 5 experts here in some different areas. Well, you're an educator, but you can talk to people that are outside. I sit down and I'll have lunch with the bank president and just pick his brain about how they track their money and think, how could this equate to, can we be more efficient with our CFO? And talk to retail, talk to HR people. Okay, how do you go about this? Could we do our process better? With that, years ago, I met with someone who ran a major marketing firm and said, talk to me about getting a message out. And it was interesting because I didn't go to school and I don't have a marketing degree. And he said, oh, you go through marketing. And he said, they'll tell you got to get your message out 7 different ways. And that's always stuck with me. And I've shared that with other educators. You got to get it out 7 different ways. And a lot of times when we do things, I kind of ask people, have we done that? We've got a website, and we've got an app, and we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, and we've got Instagram, but we've got our all call, and we can send text messages out. And then we've got our newsletters, and then we've got the billboard outside the school, and you start going, okay, we've got 9 or 10 ways. So depending on the urgency level, is this something we send every single possible way? Or is this something that, we're a little more passive about putting it out there? But at the end of the day, it needs to be more of a feeling that the community is thinking, oh my goodness, I know the event is Friday night at 7 because we've been told every possible way. I like to feel like if someone doesn't know, it's because they were in a cave, but as far as a lot of different methods, those are ways we use a platform that allows us to streamline it so that we can actually we have all the ways that we send things out, and we can click the boxes of the ones we want to use. And then when we push send, it puts that same message literally in a text on the website, on Facebook. And that way, if we change it, we don't run the risk of, and this is a big problem sometimes, someone shows up for something on one day, well, your website still says this date, or Facebook still said that, we've got to make sure that we streamline it so that it's out there. That's mass stuff, but I don't think you can remove communication from the one-on-one stuff either. I go to Rotary lunch every Wednesday, and a lot of that is, I'm sure from the outside I can look, oh, it must be nice to just go sit at the country club and eat lunch. But a lot of that's the conversation with the business leaders in town. The mayor's a member, the police chief, you have those conversations where you've got a once a week that you can have communication with these people. And it kind of goes back to that very beginning. The conversations that I have when we ask that's on the front end, but then there has to be a maintenance piece to that relationship where you communicate with people frequently.
You ever have a public relations person specifically for your system?
We did in Decatur. We do not in Demopolis. That is my daughter's job. Should do a great job here, but I couldn't hire her. But so yes and no, we do not have one now. I think that's a great resource. I think that it's something that shows a lot of forward thinking for districts, because it is such a vital piece. And for years, we've talked about how important communication is, but so many districts don't have that public relations person. So I think that is, we do a supplement at each school for someone to take care of it. So in some ways we still do, but we don't have that one single person, but we did in Decatur. Like I said, that's my daughter's job.
Gone through a branding or rebranding of your schools?
We did that when I got to Demopolis. When I first drove up, and this sounds crazy, and I really even still, but I took pictures, or our high school principal took pictures. We arrived about the same time, and there were 21 different logos and fonts and everything across our district of Demopolis. And I said, look, there's certain schools I could name. If I show you their logo, you know exactly who that is, whether it's Alabama or Auburn or Tennessee or even the schools. And we felt like, okay, we need to do this. So we actually worked on that. We did brand it, and we actually got a contract, had a good contact with someone that used to be the National Association of Athletic Directors. He's from Demopolis. So I kind of leaned on him a lot for that process, and we now have that streamlined.
Thank you.
Before we leave communication, you talked about how you would communicate with everyone. Talk to me about how others would have access and communicate with you.
I know everybody says they have an open door policy, but literally, I met with parents at 8 o'clock at night. If they get off work, just come by my office. Well, I don't get off till 8. Well, I'll be there. And every employee, I would say every employee has my cell phone number. If they don't, it's because they just didn't want it. It's out there. I give it to them, and I'm not talking about a school phone. It's literally the same one my kids would call me on. I probably have 2/3 of them in my phone. We're to a point in our society where that's the easiest way to communicate with people. We tell them to check their emails 3 times a day, and I think most do, but they're going to see their phone quicker. I think that accessibility is helpful. I cannot think of a single time since I've been in Demopolis that someone has asked to meet with me, and I've said I can't. Unless it's, hey, the I can't would be, I'm out of town, and as soon as I get back, you want to meet before school. That's just a piece of that. If someone feels strong enough to ask to meet with me, then absolutely, we're going to sit down. We're going to talk about it.
So, just for grins and giggles, let's say it's out of line. It's a parent. Do you push them back to principal first, or how do you handle that chaos? So
I do think that there is definitely some people that like to go straight to the top, and sometimes it's just let them vent. I don't make any comments, just sit there and say, okay, At the end of it, have you talked to the teacher? Have you talked to the principal? If the answer is no, then okay, you go do that. If you can't get that resolved, then we can have a follow-up conversation later. But I'm not going to try to fix anything if they have just skipped all the way through.
I'd like to ask you about your relationship, your leadership style with your principals. You know, that they're the heads of your schools. So what responsibilities do you delegate to them? How do you describe your style with your principals?
You know, the good thing is I have been a principal at every level, K-12. I've been an elementary principal, I've been a middle school principal, I've been a high school principal. So that helps. It does not mean I am the expert by any means, but it does mean I at least have firsthand experience in that world. I'm one of the few state certified principal mentors in Alabama. That means they can assign mentor. I've had plenty of principals that were assigned as people to do their internship in my district where I oversee them. I did that for a while for an online university as well. They were, it was Grand Canyon. They're out in Phoenix or something. And if they had people in North Alabama, I would oversee them as well. That was just something from years ago, but Alabama still sends people to our school to do their internships. But more practical with the people that work in our district, have a good relationship with them. I feel like that we have to remember that as much as they are given the task of leading their school along the path that's outlined by the district, the same way that I've been tasked with leading the district along the path that the stakeholders and the board says, then I feel like they need to have the freedom to do that because they should know their school better than anyone else. When I was a principal, I always had a motto of every class, every day. As a superintendent, I kind of transformed that to a school every day. I don't get in every school every day. There are some days I do, but I'm going to be in a school every day. And so I can get snapshots of what's going on, but I'm naive and I'm kidding myself if I think I know more about what's going on in that school than the principal that's there every single day. So with that, I need to trust their judgment and I need to value their opinion. That does not mean no matter what, they're always right, because some things do need to be made at the district level for either continuity or consistency. But for the most part, I'm trusting them to be the expert of their school. I'm always, my wife says I should have been a lawyer. Even our board attorney has said that. But I think it's because I always look for, I've got to have a reason. I have to have facts. And I kind of operate that way, even with my principals. If they want to do something, a lot of times I'm not disagreeing. I'm picking their brain. Okay, tell me why. Why are you thinking that? And I think until they get to know me, they're thinking I disagree. It's like, no, I just want to make sure you feel good about the decision. Can you defend it? Can you justify it? Because for me, when I bring a recommendation to a board, I can justify why. That doesn't mean it's right, but I can give you a rationale. I'm not going to just make a decision, and I want my principals to be the same way. If you have thought this through and you've gathered the facts and you have the information, then I need to trust your judgment, and all that's under the assumption that it is within board policy and everything like that. But there's a lot of decisions that are made every day by school leaders that are not to do with board policy or anything. It's just the day-to-day decisions that have to be made.
Leads me into another question that we had on here, but you were talking about, bringing a policy or procedure to the board. What is describe your relationship with your school board?
It's very good. I'm very blessed. It's a good, I think the same here where in Demopolis, the city council appoints the board members. So in some ways, I know the chain of command. I know I am one of two people that the board hires. And I understand that responsibility that I answer to them. My job, I think of three things. I think one, my job is to work in a way that they can trust my education expertise. They have different jobs. Only one of them was an educator, so they have to trust my education expertise. You're not hiring someone that you have to hold their hand and show them how to do the job. But then secondly, they need to trust, you've got to be able to trust that your superintendent makes good, rational, solid decisions on a day-to-day basis. And then that third piece is that everything is the recommendations that I bring need to be in line, not with any, I don't have a personal agenda, but it's not my gut or something I like. It's literally, this is what's best for our kids. This is what's in line with our mission and goals. And when I do that, that helps that relationship. There are school districts in the state that really struggle. And if you do a root cause analysis, it really traces back to that relationship. If this relationship isn't good, then the whole district's going to suffer.
Well, talk to me about community. Let's talk about community. I mean, Trustful is a of a similar, well, how many people live in Demopolis?
It's not as large as Trustful. It's more in that 10,000. It's where y'all were probably 15 years ago. So,
yeah.
right.
Probably about when I moved here. So let's talk about community and the relationship that you as superintendent would have with the community as a whole.
The relationship with the community as a whole.
What do you see as your role within the community? Maybe that's a better question.
My role is to create partnerships and represent in a one high school town. I realize and I embrace it and I'm fine with it, but it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 300, it doesn't matter when I'm at the gas station, when I'm on vacation, I'm still the superintendent of Trustful City Schools. There's no, well, now this is my own time. No, that everyone knows. I always say, whether it's right, it's reality. People kind of tag you by what you do. I mean, a lot of times when you first meet someone, you introduce yourself as, what do you do for a living? And it defines you. It shouldn't, but it's the reality. So I realize that when I see people, they might not even know my name. They'll go, that's the superintendent. So that means the way you dress, the way you act, the way you talk, the way you tip at a restaurant, you're the superintendent. And so I think that there's that awareness that is important. And just like we said, we want everything that has our name on it, whether it's an athletic team or a band or a theater, we want it to be a level of excellence. I feel like that I would be responsible for that as well, because I would be carrying that name with me. Now, the details it's yes, you've got to be at the youth league, but in a town like this, everybody that plays T-ball is some of our elementary kids. It's not just the high school games. But when I send out things to my board, and I do to the community as well, I divide into 4 categories. I communicate with maintenance and operations. Everybody wants to know the updates on the things that we're working on. Academics, there's always good things to brag about or upcoming things that they need to be aware of. Extracurricular, there's a host of things that fit under that. And the 4th category I always report to my board on and make sure the community is aware of is just community. There's always stuff going on in our community that involves our kids, that involves our families, because I've used the term conjoined siblings between a city and the school. The fact of the matter is, years ago, I remember a superintendent was frustrated. He'd called me up. He was frustrated about he had a new job and they had not gotten a good state report card. And I said, don't beat yourself up. I said, because we call it a school grade, but it's a community grade. You can't separate the two. I've yet to see a horrible community with great school or vice versa. You can't have, if it's a great community, you'll have a good school. The two go hand in hand. We have to work together and we have to recognize that and embrace the fact that, in Demopolis, they were wanting to increase taxes for the schools. And we realized the hospital was struggling. We've got to take care of the hospital first, because if the community dies, the school will too. So we took care of the hospital first, and then we circled back a couple of years later and we passed a tax for the schools. But we realized we can't just take care of the school at the expense of the city, because if the city dies, there will be no school.
So, as you well know, when you come into a position like this, there are so many special interests, shall I say. Whether it be athletics, academics, arts, all the different people. And I'll even take this into a diversity question. How do you personally deal with all the opinions and interests coming in? How do you make sure everyone feels engaged? And then if possible, can you tell us a time you've ever had just give someone the news they didn't want to hear and how you did that?
Unfortunately, yes. I do think that just, doing needs assessments is important. Sometimes having third parties to do surveys gives you more authentic feedback. Even if it's digital, they figure there's some way, we've even sometimes done paper in a box so people can feel like no one will know who turned that in, and you can get more real information. You have to work diligently not to just let the loud voice get their way, because sometimes there's a silent majority, and sometimes there's people that, so you have to be intentional to circle back to people and say, where are we on this? What do we need? And you do have a lot of needs. We helped that in Demopolis recently. We're in the middle of the process because we had the baseball people wanted this, the softball people want this, the basketball, the football. There's a million needs. There's 17 different sports. And there's 17 different parent groups that want something. And then the band wants something, and the robotics want something. The Beta Club want. So we basically did a survey, and we brainstormed, brought a committee together to come up with everything you could think of that should be on the plate of what we need. And then we sent it out, and we had everybody just pick their top 5 priorities. And just like the school district has to have a capital plan, we're in the middle of making an athletic capital plan of, okay, people can wait if they know we're third in line. We're going to get new lights in 3 years, rather than just maybe if we cause enough noise, we'll get it now. So we worked on trying to start prioritizing things. And sometimes it is a no, but the no is more of a not now. And they feel like they've heard that forever. If you can put a plan that says, okay, it's not now, but here's the list, and this is planned for 22, this is for 23, this is for 24, and we've earmarked X amount of money to take care of these things, people can live with it better.
And that kind of thing seems to be a big part of a superintendent's job. And yet it seems like most superintendents, we've trained them all their life to be great at academics. Is that kind of in your jam, or is that something you found yourself learning to deal with? Or
now, which one?
Well, the whole strategy of strategic planning or seeing 5 years out. That's not naturally something someone in your position, like you said, you've been in school since you were 6 years old.
Right.
That's not something you're equipped for as much as your excellence in academics. But how do you square that? Do you consider that to be something you've gotten comfortable with over the years, or?
I do. I think that it goes back to, I was very young when I took over as athletic director. I was still in my 20s, and it was a very successful athletic program. And I feel like that helps, because you start having to plan long-term ahead and start thinking through. And that's another reason that my doctorate's in leadership instead of just education, because there's so much of what we do that's not just student achievement. And I mean, half the people that's in my doctorate program with me are, they're civic leaders and politicians that are looking at more CEOs of how to run a business. And most of the stuff that I sign, people don't realize it, but it actually says CEO. That's really what this job is. It's the CEO of the school district. And there's a huge piece of it. The essence of what we do is student achievement, but the student achievement moves because this other stuff is all. There's a lot of kids that, whether it's right or wrong, their incentive to do well in school is because of the other stuff.
Just really quickly, can you touch on special ed and what your experiences with special ed and programs that you would implement in here?
Yeah, we're giving extra money for people, that have special needs. There's a piece there that really traces back to something I've already touched on. You've got to treat every child like they're your own. And my 3 children are very different. And I think that's helped me to have different understandings of different things, where, sports may come really easy for one kid and the other one really struggles or doesn't make a team, and academics can be easy for one kid. And when you see that as a parent, or you see that as a family member, it helps you to be a little more compassionate. But leaning on the experts, making sure that your special ed people communicate. I think that in my experience, at least, the root of so many of the problems and the litigation and the the times that, you know, a 504 and IEP goes awry is there just wasn't good communication through the whole process, whether it's between coordinators or between the families. Those are important parts.
So if you have anything you want to ask us or closing comments or anything you would like to add to this interview.
I guess the few things that, you know, there wasn't anything that necessarily led directly to it. I think that in this position, there is a huge piece that you work hard to improve culture and climate. And contrary to popular belief, sometimes you can actually do that by doing the hard things. A lot of people don't like to have the hard conversations. I've had to do that multiple times. I meet with my principals and I make them go through their entire faculty and give them a 1 through 5 and tell me 5 is the rock stars, the few people in your building, and the ones. And at the end, and we do that multiple times a year. And at the end, I say, okay, all these 5s, do they know it? Well, I think they should. Now, you may be losing wind in some of these people's sales if you haven't told them. Do the ones know it? Well, they should. Now, sometimes the ones think they're a 4, you know, and you've got to have those conversations. I've been blessed. We've had good growth because of that. We've actually, you know, besides just being a showcase school and speaking for different things, I'm actually going to be a keynote speaker at the National Superintendent's Conference this summer. And the topic is culture and climate as it relates to student achievement. I feel like that's the essence of what we've built our success on. I feel like that there's a lot of things about Trustful that are enviable for everyone in the state. I think that there is so much right. And honestly, you know, I've watched your board meetings. I've watched your work sessions, and you've had to navigate some treacherous waters. You've done so with professionalism. You've done so in a way that's to be commended. I think that people would feel blessed to be here. I feel like that the Trustful 2040, and I don't know if that's a document that y'all still look at and everything, but that's something that when I look at that and I see that phrase, you want to be a premier district in the state, I think, well, I think you are a premier district. We want to be the, and that's the piece when I look at. And I feel like that there's people who are familiar with high achieving, high expectation districts. I've spent most of my career in that. But where I feel like I'm different is I've also deviated and gone to some places that have actually the 3 places that this district has the biggest gap. I've been able to go in and work and figure out how to close those gaps. And it would be great to come back and say, okay, if Trustful is this good and you have some things that are headed the wrong way or you have some gaps, how great could it be if we fixed those? And I'd love to be a part of it.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Hey, is there anything here you really wanted to point out, or are you supposed to read this tonight?
You can look through it. I mean, you can throw it in the garbage if you want. You know, it's just something that I felt like that there's some highlights in there. Definitely some of the stuff about data. I mean, I know Trustful's data, and yes, I know the data here, and I feel like that there's some connections that we could make better.
Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, that's just.